When school lockdowns turn terrifying, 4 creepy stories. Welcome to DTC, the place of the brave, where the shadows of fear and the unknown come to life. In today's video, we dive into a chilling collection of 4 school lockdown horror stories that will send shivers down your spine. Imagine being trapped in a place you thought was safe, only to realize that something far more terrifying lurks within. From eerie whispers to unexplainable occurrences, these real-life experiences will make you question what's hiding behind the locked doors of your school. Stay tuned, and remember, the darkness is always closer than you think. Story 1. The Job in the Basement. I had always known that working in the basement of the school wasn't exactly ideal, but it was part of the job, and it was a quiet one, perfect for someone like me. I was the maintenance guy, responsible for fixing things no one else had the time to deal with, keeping the rooms in order, checking machinery, and ensuring everything was running smoothly. The basement was isolated, quiet, almost forgotten, tucked away beneath the rest of the school. Few people ever came down here. On a typical day, everything seemed ordinary. The school was conducting a fire drill, the usual safety procedure to prepare students for emergencies. It was supposed to be a simple evacuation exercise, and I was supposed to stay in the basement, out of the way, as always. But that day was different. I received a notification through my phone, an emergency alert. Warning, armed intruder reported near the school premises. The words felt like a slap to my face. The type of alert you never expect to receive, not in a school that always felt safe, not in a place I had worked for years without incident. Panic rose in my chest as I immediately locked my phone and stood up. But then something even stranger began to stir within me. I felt a growing sense of unease, a cold knot of fear that I couldn't shake off. I quickly checked the security monitors in the basement. No sign of movement outside, nothing unusual on the screens. Still, my mind wouldn't stop racing. I couldn't help it. My instincts told me something wasn't right. And then I noticed it, something I hadn't paid attention to before. The maintenance room door was open. I could have sworn I'd closed it when I left earlier, but now the door was ajar, almost as if someone had just walked in. My breath caught in my throat. I moved toward the door, my footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. As I got closer, I paused. A flicker of doubt crossed my mind. Was it someone else from the school? Or was it something else? I couldn't be sure. The thought of locking the door crossed my mind, but I felt uneasy about it. I forced myself to take a deep breath and move forward, pushing the door shut and locking it. I turned back to my work, trying to focus, trying to ignore the growing tension. But no matter how hard I tried, something felt off. A presence I couldn't explain hovered in the air, like something or someone was watching me. I forced myself to concentrate on the task at hand. Then I heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps. I froze. My heart hammered in my chest as I listened, straining to hear more clearly. The footsteps weren't ordinary. They were slow, deliberate, almost as if someone was trying to sneak around, carefully avoiding detection. I swallowed hard, glancing at the clock on the wall. The school should have been empty by now. The students were supposed to be evacuating, but these footsteps, these quiet, deliberate steps, were coming closer. They weren't from anyone I knew. And then, as if in response to my thoughts, I heard a voice. "Is anyone in there?" My blood ran cold. The voice was unfamiliar, and it wasn't one of the teachers or anyone I had ever heard before. My first thought was that it was some kind of prank, but something about it felt different. The voice wasn't loud, it wasn't aggressive, but it was chilling, like it was speaking directly to me. A shiver ran down my spine, and I couldn't move. I glanced around the room, feeling the walls closing in on me. The basement, once familiar and empty, now felt like a cage. I quickly scanned the hallway through the small window in the door. No one was there. The steps continued, slow and steady, moving closer. I felt my heart beat faster, my pulse racing, but I couldn't tell who it was or what it was. There was nothing but silence between each step, the air thick with something unspoken. Then I heard the sound again. The door to the maintenance room rattled. The unmistakable sound of something or someone pushing against it. Someone was trying to get in, my breath caught in my throat. The door rattled once more, this time harder, as though someone was putting all their weight against it, trying to force their way in. Panic set in. My hands trembled as I reached for my phone, dialing the emergency number. "Please," I whispered to myself, my voice shaking, "please don't let them get in." The phone rang once, twice. Finally, someone picked up. 911, what's your emergency?" The dispatcher asked, her voice calm, but I could hear the faint crackle of tension in the background. "There's someone in the building, in the basement. I think they're trying to break in," I stammered, my words coming out in a rush. "I can hear them outside the door. They're trying to open it." The dispatcher reassured me they were sending help, but I could hear the uncertainty in her voice. "Stay on the line," she instructed. Elle backed away from the door, my legs shaking as I crouched in the corner of the room, pressing myself into the shadows. Every sound seemed magnified in the stillness of the basement. Every slight noise made my heart leap into my throat. The door rattled again. I couldn't stop myself from flinching. Then the rattle stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. My breath hitched as I waited for the next sound, but it didn't come. Instead, I heard the faint sound of footsteps retreating, slow, deliberate steps. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. Someone was leaving. Minutes passed, but it felt like hours. When the police finally arrived, they searched the entire building. They checked every room, every hallway, every closet, but found nothing. There were no signs of an intruder. The maintenance room door was locked, just as I had left it. No footprints, no fingerprints, no sign of anyone having been there. I wanted to feel relieved. I wanted to believe it was just a misunderstanding. But the unsettling feeling didn't leave me. It lingered. The air still felt thick, charged with something I couldn't explain. Something was wrong, something I couldn't see. The lockdown drill continued as if nothing had happened. The police left, reassured everyone, and told us all to get back to normal. But I couldn't. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, that something or someone was still down there with me. And I couldn't forget the voice. I never went back to the basement after that day. I was reassigned to another part of the school, far away from that room, far away from that place. But even now, every time I walk past the old building, every time I think about the basement, I feel that same unsettling presence, creeping closer from behind, like it's just waiting for me to turn around. It's been months since that day, but I still hear the voice sometimes. "Is anyone in there?" And every time I feel that cold, creeping chill down my spine as I wonder, just who was asking that question and why? Was it a prank, a break-in, or was it something much darker, something I'll never fully understand? One thing I do know for sure is that I'm not the only one who heard it, and I'm not the only one who still feels the shadows moving in the basement, waiting, always waiting. Do you dare to listen to the dark? If tonight's tale gave you chills, let us know your thoughts in the comments. We want to hear what creeps you out and what other stories you'd love us to explore. Don't miss out on the next terrifying story. Subscribe to DTC, The Place of the Brave, and join the family that thrives on the unknown. Tap the notification bell so you're the first to hear every spine-chilling tale. Share this video with someone brave enough to face the darkness, and let's dive deeper into the creeps that haunt our world. Comment below and become part of the terror. The darkness is calling, and we want you with us. Story 2, Sports Day and the Gun Intruder. It was supposed to be an ordinary sports day at school, a day filled with fun and friendly competition, but for Brandon it turned into something far worse, something he would never forget. Brandon had been injured a few days before, and as his friends eagerly ran out onto the field to join the games, he was stuck in the classroom, alone. It wasn't a huge deal, he told himself. He could use the break. But the longer he sat there, the more he began to feel uneasy. The walls of the classroom, which usually buzzed with the chatter of his classmates, felt suffocatingly quiet. The sound of laughter and shouting from the field outside grew fainter as the minutes ticked by. Brandon shifted uncomfortably in his chair, glancing at the window, watching his friends as they played, their carefree voices fading into nothingness. He pulled out his phone to distract himself, but something was wrong. He couldn't put his finger on it, but everything felt off. He looked around the room, his heart pounding a little harder now. There was no reason for the air to feel so thick with tension, yet it did. The silence was heavy, almost suffocating. No one had come in to check on him. No one had even passed by the door. He could have sworn that the hallway outside was usually bustling with people, but it was as if the world had just stopped. Suddenly the classroom door creaked open, shattering the stillness with its unsettling sound. Brandon's eyes snapped toward the door. A figure stood there, cloaked in a black hoodie, his face obscured by shadows. The man's presence filled the room with an indescribable chill. Brandon froze. His body wouldn't move. His breath hitched in his chest. The stranger's voice cut through the silence like a knife. "Come with me," he said in a low, emotionless tone. Brandon's mind screamed at him to run, to get up and bolt for the door, but his body refused to respond. Fear rooted him to the spot. He felt his hands go clammy as the stranger stepped closer, his footsteps slow and deliberate. Brandon could feel the weight of the man's gaze, even though he couldn't see his eyes. A deep, instinctual fear began to take over, a sense of danger he couldn't escape. The man reached into his coat and pulled out a gun, placing it directly in Brandon's hands. The cold steel of the weapon felt alien, as if it didn't belong there. Brandon's heart skipped a beat. His mouth went dry. Everything in his body screamed at him to drop it, to run, to escape. But the door was blocked. There was no way out. The man's voice was now barely a whisper. "You're going to help me." Every nerve in Brandon's body was on fire, his mind racing. What was happening? Why was this happening? He could hear the faint sound of laughter from outside, and for a split second, he wished he could join them, be anywhere but here. But just as his hands started to tremble with panic, a loud, shrill alarm pierced the silence, the school lockdown alarm. It screeched through the speakers, louder than anything he had ever heard. The stranger flinched, caught off guard. In that moment of distraction, Brandon saw his chance. His instincts kicked in, and with a surge of adrenaline, he darted toward the nearest exit, making a break for the hallway. His heart hammered in his chest, and for a moment he thought he could hear footsteps behind him, quick and deliberate, but when he glanced over his shoulder, there was no one there. The hallway was empty. Too empty. Something wasn't right. He ran as fast as his legs could carry him, pushing through the fear, his mind spinning in a haze of confusion. Where were his friends? Why wasn't anyone else in the hallway? Why did it feel like the school was deserted? He reached a storage room at the end of the hall and bolted inside, shutting the door behind him with a soft click. The room was dark and smelled faintly of old books and cleaning supplies. Brandon pressed himself against the wall, trying to steady his breathing, but his chest felt tight. The gun was still in his hands, and he didn't know what to do with it. His thoughts raced, trying to make sense of the madness. Every minute felt like an eternity. His heart was still thumping wildly, and his mind was foggy with fear. There was a cold sweat on his forehead as he listened intently. The building was eerily silent, and the sound of his own breathing was the only thing he could hear. His mind kept playing tricks on him. Every creak of the floor, every flicker of the overhead lights made him jump. Then the footsteps came. Slow, methodical, each step louder than the last. They were getting closer. Brandon pressed himself deeper into the shadows, praying that whoever was out there wouldn't find him. His mind was a blur of frantic thoughts, each one worse than the last. What was going on? Why wasn't anyone else around? Where were the teachers, the other students? The footsteps stopped just outside the storage room. Brandon held his breath, too terrified to even blink. He could feel his body shaking, his fingers numb around the gun. Then, just as suddenly as they had appeared, the footsteps faded away. Brandon waited for what felt like forever, too afraid to move. Was it over? Was he safe? Suddenly, the sound of sirens pierced through the stillness, the wail of police cars growing louder outside. Relief flooded Brandon's chest, but it was short-lived. A few moments later, the door to the storage room creaked open. Brandon couldn't believe his eyes. There, standing in the doorway, was the man in the hoodie. But this time his eyes were visible, cold, empty, and devoid of any emotion. Behind him, police officers rushed into the room, but they froze as they saw the man. There was something wrong about him, something that didn't quite fit. No one could explain it, how he had gotten in, why he had done what he did, or how he had gotten past the security measures. It didn't make sense. Brandon couldn't bring himself to speak. His mind was spinning. Was he really safe? Or had the stranger just been waiting for the right moment? Was this whole thing some twisted game? Even as the police led the man away in cuffs, Brandon felt the terror still lingering in the pit of his stomach. It wasn't over. He could feel it. Days passed, but the fear didn't go away. Brandon couldn't stop thinking about the stranger's eyes, the way they seemed to see right through him, the way they made him feel like nothing more than prey. Every corner he turned, every shadow in the hallway, every time the school bell rang, it all felt wrong. He tried to tell himself that it was over, that he was safe. But deep down, he knew better. The stranger hadn't been acting alone. Something darker was at play. And somewhere deep within the school, Brandon could still feel the eyes of the man watching him, waiting, watching, waiting, and perhaps, just perhaps, planning his next move. Do you dare to listen to the dark? If tonight's tale gave you chills, let us know your thoughts in the comments. We want to hear what creeps you out and what other stories you'd love us to explore. Don't miss out on the next terrifying story. Subscribe to DTC, The Place of the Brave, and join the family that thrives on the unknown. Tap the notification bell so you're the first to hear every spine-chilling tale. Share this video with someone brave enough to face the darkness, and let's dive deeper into the creeps that haunt our world. Comment below and become part of the terror. The darkness is calling, and we want you with us. Story 3, The Silence That Screams, a School Lockdown Horror. I still remember that day as if it happened only yesterday, a day that started like any other, but soon turned into a nightmare I'll never forget. It was lunchtime at school. The usual buzz of chatter filled the cafeteria. Students were scattered around, laughing, eating, and talking in groups, blissfully unaware of the horror about to unfold. The air was thick with the smell of cafeteria food, and the rhythmic clinking of trays on tables created a false. Suddenly, a loud, deafening bang echoed through the school. It was so sharp, so jarring, that for a moment I thought the building itself was going to collapse. The sound felt like a violent explosion, a thunderous crash that sent everyone jumping out of their seats in panic. At first, we all thought it was just some kind of accident, maybe a truck backfiring or something else outside. We laughed nervously, looking at each other with uneasy glances, trying to convince ourselves that it was nothing more than a strange noise. But then it happened again. Another loud, violent boom, this time much closer, as though it was coming from inside the school. The walls seemed to tremble, and the floor beneath us vibrated. It was no longer just a noise, it was a warning, an omen. A feeling of dread swept over me, like a heavy fog rolling in. People were starting to panic, whispers of "what was that?" and "is it a drill?" filled the air, but no one really knew what to do. Something was wrong. Something was definitely not right. A student, eyes wide with terror, bolted toward the nearest window. She pressed her face against the glass, straining to see what was going on outside. Her breath fogged up the window as she tried to look past the fog and into the distant schoolyard. I followed her, heart pounding, but before I could catch a glimpse of anything, the lights flickered and went out, plunging us into darkness. The hum of the fluorescent lights that had once filled the cafeteria with a sterile, unremarkable glow was replaced by an eerie, suffocating silence. A chill crept up my spine. It was as if the world outside had stopped. The usual bustle of the school grounds, the chatter, the cars pulling up in the parking lot, everything had just frozen. In that oppressive stillness, it felt like the world was holding its breath, waiting for something horrible to happen. The door to the cafeteria suddenly slammed open with a violent crash, and everyone jumped. A gust of cold wind rushed in, causing papers and napkins to fly into the air, swirling in chaotic, ghostly patterns. Standing in the doorway was a shadowy figure, their silhouette barely visible against the dim light of the hallway. The figure didn't move, just stood there watching us. And that was the moment I knew whatever was going on outside wasn't normal. The principal's voice crackled through the intercom, breaking the tense silence. "Attention, students. This is not a drill. Please remain calm and proceed to your classrooms. Lock all doors and windows. Do not leave your rooms until further notice. This is a lockdown situation." My heart skipped a beat. This wasn't a drill. The words "lockdown situation" hung in the air like a bad omen, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the school was no longer the safe place I had always thought it to be. I glanced around the room. The faces of my classmates, usually so lively and carefree, were now pale with fear. Some were whispering prayers under their breath. Others were trembling in place. The girl who had looked out the window earlier was still staring, her face frozen with terror, as if she had seen something none of us could comprehend. I didn't want to move. I couldn't bring myself to look out the window to confirm what I knew was true. That something was out there, something sinister. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the sound of people's breathing, quick and shallow. The tension in the air was thick enough to choke on. We were all trapped, caged inside these walls with no idea what was happening outside. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the doors slammed shut once more. This time they didn't just creak, they locked with an unmistakable click. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. That wasn't the sound of a door simply closing, it was the sound of something far worse, something far more sinister. Suddenly the power cut out. The lights went out, and for a moment all I could hear was the frantic sound of my own breathing and the faint, rhythmic thudding of footsteps from somewhere in the building. But these weren't the footsteps of teachers or students. They were heavy, deliberate, like someone or something was walking toward us. Every step felt like it was getting closer, drawing nearer to where we were hiding, waiting. The air grew colder, like the temperature was plummeting. I could see my breath puffing out in front of me, a mist of fear. Then there was another noise, closer this time, almost like a whisper. It was soft, but I could feel it scraping across my skin, crawling into my ears. The whispers turned into a low, guttural growl, so deep it vibrated in my chest. It was the sound of something, alive, but not human. And then, the worst part, a voice came through the intercom again, but this time it wasn't the principal. It was something else, something unfamiliar. It sounded distorted, like it had been altered, scrambled. "You can't hide. We are here. We've always been here." The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. My stomach dropped. We weren't just trapped by a lockdown, we were being hunted. I tried to call for help, but my voice was strangled by fear. The others in the room were whispering in panic, some praying, others crying, but no one dared to move. No one dared to speak above a whisper. There was no way out. The windows were locked tight, the doors were sealed. The school was our cage. Minutes felt like hours. The sound of footsteps grew louder, and the whispers turned into shrill, inhuman shrieks. Then, without warning, the lights flickered back on, but the relief was short-lived. The room was filled with a new presence, a suffocating, malevolent force that seemed to have taken over the air itself. I don't know how much time passed before the door burst open again, but this time it wasn't just one shadowy figure. The entire hallway seemed to be filled with them, shapes that moved like smoke, their eyes glowing with an eerie, unnatural light. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The terror they radiated was enough. I don't remember much after that. Everything became a blur of fear and chaos, and I know I wasn't the only one who felt like we were being pulled into something darker than we could ever understand. We were no longer students in a school. We were prey, and whatever was outside was hunting us. And to this day, I still don't know what really happened that day. The authorities came and cleared the school, but there are whispers of things still lurking, still waiting for the next time the school bell rings. Because whatever was out there, it's not gone. It's just waiting, watching, and the next lockdown will be worse. Do you dare to listen to the dark? If tonight's tale gave you chills, let us know your thoughts in the comments. We want to hear what creeps you out and what other stories you'd love us to explore. Don't miss out on the next terrifying story. Subscribe to DTC, The Place of the Brave, and join the family that thrives on the unknown. Tap the notification bell so you're the first to hear every spine-chilling tale. Share this video with someone brave enough to face the darkness, and let's dive deeper into the creeps that haunt our world. Comment below and become part of the terror. The darkness is calling, and we want you with us. Story 4. Creepy School Lockdown Horror Stories. The Mysterious Explosion. It was supposed to be an ordinary school day, just like any other. The bell rang to mark the end of another class, and students shuffled into the cafeteria, chatting about the usual trivial things: homework, what to have for lunch, and plans for the weekend. The air was filled with laughter and the comforting hum of teenage life. No one could have predicted what was about to unfold. It started with a loud, unexpected crack, a deafening boom that rattled the windows and vibrated the floor beneath us. At first, we all thought it was thunder. The sky had darkened slightly, and there was a low rumble, so it seemed like a natural thing. But then a second explosion, even louder and closer, erupted from the front of the school. This one shook the walls, and the sound was unlike any thunder I had ever heard. It was almost unnatural. The air in the cafeteria turned thick with tension. No one spoke for a few moments, but all around I could feel the anxiety building. People glanced nervously at each other, their eyes wide with unease. What had just happened? It didn't feel right. It couldn't have just been a lightning strike. Something was off. My heart pounded in my chest, and I could feel a knot tightening in my stomach. I looked around, but no one seemed to have answers. We were all in the same boat, confused, scared, and uncertain. And then came the announcement. The loudspeakers crackled to life, and the voice of the principal, Mr. Anderson, cut through the eerie silence. Attention all students and staff. This is a Level 1 lockdown. Immediately proceed to the nearest classroom or multipurpose room. No one is allowed to leave the building. Remain in place and await further instructions. The cold, calm tone of his voice did nothing to reassure us. It only made the situation feel more surreal. Why didn't they tell us what was going on? Why were we being locked in? Was it some kind of attack? The questions flooded my mind, but no one had answers. We just had to do what we were told. I remember standing frozen for a few seconds, trying to make sense of everything, before I turned and walked quickly toward my classroom. My legs felt like jelly, and my thoughts were jumbled. I wasn't sure if I was more scared of what was happening or of the uncertainty, of not knowing what was outside, What was causing these explosions? As I hurried down the hallway, I noticed how still everything seemed. No one was talking, everyone was walking with purpose, but there was an almost unnatural quietness to the entire scene. The usual noise of students laughing and joking was gone. It felt as if the school itself had gone silent in the wake of the explosions. The hallway lights flickered for a split second as I passed under them, and I had a brief flash of unease. Was I imagining things, or was the air in the building growing colder? I reached my classroom and found the door closed but not locked. I pushed it open, and Mrs. Davis, our teacher, was standing by the window, her face pale. She didn't even look at me as I entered, her eyes fixed on the scene outside, her hands gripping the windowsill so tightly her knuckles were white. "We need to stay calm," she said in a voice that was too steady to be believable. "Stay quiet and wait. Don't make any noise." Her voice cracked at the end, and I could tell that she, too, was scared. But the scariest part wasn't her fear. It was the way she looked out the window, as if something was out there, something that she couldn't explain. I sat at my desk, heart racing, trying to make sense of it all. The school was on lockdown, and the explosions were still fresh in my mind. But what if it wasn't just a bombing or an accident? What if there was something more? Something darker? Something we couldn't even imagine? A few students whispered nervously among themselves, speculating wildly about what might be happening. "It could be a terrorist attack," one said. "Maybe there's a shooter in the school," another suggested, their voice shaking. The rumors spread like wildfire, each one more terrifying than the last. But even though I was scared, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something worse lurking beneath the surface. Something far more sinister than we could ever guess. Minutes felt like hours. The tension in the room was suffocating. I kept glancing toward the window, expecting to see something, anything out of the ordinary. But the schoolyard was empty, eerily so. No police cars, no ambulances, no sirens, nothing. It was as if the world outside had been frozen in place, caught in some terrible, unnatural stillness. And then the third explosion. This one was the loudest yet. The whole building shook, and I heard the glass in the windows rattle. A few students jumped in their seats, startled by the sheer power of the blast. I could feel the shockwave in my chest. I was frozen for a moment, unable to move or even think. What was happening? Why wasn't anyone explaining? The fear was palpable now, hanging thick in the air like a fog. I could hear my own heartbeat thumping in my ears. But then, as suddenly as the explosions had started, the intercom crackled again. The voice was mechanical, monotone, and strangely detached. "Attention all students and staff, the lockdown is still in effect. Remain in your classrooms. Emergency services have identified the source of the explosions. The situation is under control. Continue to wait until further notice." Relief washed over me, but it didn't last long. The words didn't make sense. If the situation was under control, why hadn't anyone come for us yet? Why were we still locked in our classrooms with no answers, no explanation? An unsettling quiet had fallen over the school, and with it came a sense of dread. It wasn't just the explosions that were terrifying, it was the complete lack of any real information, the strange sense that something was being hidden from us. We were in the dark, left to fill in the blanks with our own wild imaginations. And believe me, the things I imagined weren't pretty. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the lockdown was lifted. The all clear came through the loudspeakers, but the feeling of unease didn't go away. I stood up and left the classroom, stepping out into the hallway. Everything was still eerily quiet, but now there was an unsettling stillness in the air. The usual sounds of the school, the chatter, the footsteps were gone. It felt like we were walking through a ghost town. I stepped outside into the parking lot, and I saw something that made my blood run cold. An ambulance, its lights flashing, but with no sirens. It sped past, and I could swear it wasn't headed for the hospital, but somewhere far darker, somewhere far worse. My thoughts were interrupted when I saw the janitor, Mr. Graves, standing near the door, staring out at the empty lot with a haunted look in his eyes. "They're still out there," he whispered when he saw me, his voice barely audible. "Don't think it's over. They're watching. They're waiting." The words sent a chill down my spine. Who was he talking about? What did he know that we didn't? I wanted to ask him more, but before I could say anything, the doors to the school slammed shut, and the lights flickered once more. And for a brief moment, I could have sworn I heard something scratching at the walls. But when I turned to look, there was nothing there, just the empty, cold silence. As the days went by, rumors continued to spread about what really happened that day. The official story? A gas leak, an accident, something easily explained away. But anyone who had been there knew it wasn't that simple. We were told it was over, that the threat had been neutralized. But I still feel it, lurking at the edges of my mind. What really happened? Who were those responsible? And why did it feel like they were still out there, waiting for us to let our guard down? Maybe I'm just paranoid. Maybe it's just my mind playing tricks on me. But there's one thing I know for sure. Something happened that day. Something dark and twisted. And I don't think we'll ever fully understand what it was. If you're ever in a situation like this, locked down, waiting for answers, remember, not all stories are told. Some are buried, left to rot in the shadows. And some things are better left unexplained. But be warned, sometimes the silence is the most terrifying part of all. As the darkness deepens and the stories grow more unsettling, we venture deeper into the unknown together. Each chilling tale brings us closer to the eerie truths lurking just beyond the veil of reality. The terror doesn't stop here, it only gets worse. Subscribe to DTC, The Place of the Brave now, and stay on the edge of your seat. You won't want to miss what's lurking in the shadows next. Hit that notification bell and prepare for the next terrifying chapter. Remember, in the world of DTC, the Place of the Brave are always waiting, and they never rest. Good luck sleeping tonight.